All right, good morning, everybody. We are going to start again, of course, with my intro slides here really quick. My name is Amy Forbes. I'm the training manager with the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's webinar, Leading and Hiring with a Culturally Appropriate and Affirming Lens with Bianca Andrews. Please know this webinar is being recorded. A certificate of attendance will be emailed to those who registered and attended, and we are not able to offer CEUs for this webinar. I'm going to give a brief overview of our network and some important information before we get started. The MHTTC network is nationwide, supported by SAMHSA. Our network includes 10 regional centers and a network coordinating office. That office is out of Stanford University. Our Northwest MHTTC covers HHS Region 10, which includes Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington State. You can see it up there in the pink circle. The goals of the Northwest MHTTC are to support mental health-related evidence-based practices, heighten awareness, knowledge, and skills of the behavioral health workforce, foster alliances and address diversity of training needs, and share free publicly available training and technical assistance. Our areas of focus are in evidence-based practices for psychosis, including CBTP and assertive community treatment or ACT. We also provide a variety of other trainings and topics, so please do check out our website. There, you will be able to register for free webinars, watch a recorded webinar, take a free online self-paced course with healthy knowledge. You can also sign up for our weekly newsletter, review our resource library, or check out our podcast called Putting It Together. And for today, just know that we will send a link to the recording, the slides, as well as your certificate of attendance within a couple of weeks after this event. And for communication during today's event, please use the chat box to reach out to our staff if you're having any issues or concerns. And please use the chat box to share your respectful comments, greetings, and observations with everyone. We ask that you use the Q&A box to type your questions for our presenter. You can do this at any point throughout the presentation. We will be monitoring the Q&A to facilitate answering as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. And I do need to let everybody know your feedback is extremely important to us. We will have a link to a survey at the end of this event. We do read those surveys and we take them seriously. It really helps us. It helps our presenters know what we're doing right and where we can improve. We are required by SAMHSA to conduct this survey, yet they do not have an official position on the content. And with that, I am very happy to welcome and introduce you all to today's presenter, Bianca Andrews. And I will turn things over to you, Bianca. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the last minute change and date and time that may have been posted for folks. I just want to say good morning to everyone. I see lots of different locations popping up as people introduce themselves. I do want to say good morning. I'm presenting today from the original lands of the Squaxin Island tribe, and I just want to make note of that and give acknowledgement to the original people that's in what is known in some spaces, Olympia, Washington. So you get some idea of where that may be located. I think it's important that we acknowledge the original people of the lands that we get to live in, that we work in, the communities that we serve, people that come into our doors from whatever agency we work. I think it's important to acknowledge the original people, even though they have been impacted through resettlement, genocide, especially the people of the Squaxin Island tribe having been displaced through the 1854 Treaty of Medicine Creek. those people still continue to be here. So we want to acknowledge the past, but also recognize that they are still here, still present. And that is very true in any of the communities that I see people joining us from. So I do want to give that acknowledgement, and beyond an acknowledgement, what can I do every day to be a good steward in the work I do, in the people I encounter, in the community I live in, and within my own community. So I'll get started by sharing my slides. So a little bit about me. Again, my name is Bianca Andrews. I use pronouns they, she. I consider myself a facilitator, trainer, practice manager. I work within the behavioral health agencies, but I also do work outside of that realm. So I consider myself a lifelong learner. I am an Indigenous queer person. I also believe that community care is sacred. I think everything we do is tied to community. So that collectivistic idea of how we move through the world and how it's connected to everyone around us, and to the world around us, the land. And I think that's important to recognize, especially talking about hiring folks, employment, organizational styles, leadership, right? How we show up in the workplace, how we show up to employment, who we're looking for. I think that's very important. And I think it's always important to keep that close to how we move. It's always tied to my next move, who I'm looking for, how I'm engaging in conversation, what do I need to continue learning? So that's just a little bit about me, and we'll go ahead and get started. So culturally affirming, I think it's important to just give a little bit of that history. Why are we talking about culturally affirming? What does that mean? Why is it important? I think it begins with DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Some places may refer to it as D&I, diversity and inclusion, maybe inclusive practices, equity. Whether you have a program specific to this, you have a DEI initiative or a D&I initiative, I think this is more than that, right? We don't need to have it placed on our website. We don't have to have a statement. It's nice if you do, because it tells people about you. But I think what's more important is how we encompass these things. And so I like to think of these values as like a framework, an organizational philosophy, if you will, that involves acknowledging, embracing, supporting, and accepting people of all backgrounds, including race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status. It can also involve addressing how access to things like food, education, even internet access, those of you who get to show up today and are present, it seems sometimes so simple, right? But there are folks without the same access. And so all of those things are unequally distributed across our society. And so it's important that we consider those factors, because those also impact the people who come to work. It may impact some of you as you show up today, what it takes to be here, to take time off, to take time to set aside, right? So it's really thinking about, or challenging you to think about, what does your organization look like from a DEI lens? Think about reflecting on actions or the processes that you have in the workplace. Are there things that you might like to see improved upon? Maybe some changes? Maybe you've been impacted by these decisions or some of the processes. Like maybe you've been part of a change or a process that had a negative impact on you, and maybe you left the workplace, maybe you continued to stay, and we know it still has impact on employees. So we also ask, or I also ask, that you consider where you sit within your organizational structure. New employee, are you aiming for promotion? Are you part of a team? Do you work alone? What's your structure? Are you the leader? Are you possibly moving into a leadership position? Maybe you're the director or administrator of an entire program. And so what does your position mean? How does that impact how you feel about yourself going into the workplace? How do some of these things that we've talked about, like these inequities across the system, across our own lifestyle, all the intersections of who we are, how does that impact us day to day in our work? Also, how does that impact our employees, the people we're looking to hire? And so this is really about thinking a little bit deeper. In another webinar, I've talked about bias and that internal process starting with self. It's also true as leaders, as folks hiring. Maybe you're part of an onboarding process. Maybe you're part of the interview, or you're the person who writes out job descriptions, and you're taking in information of who we're looking for, the person that would fit into this position. And are we writing in a way that is inclusive of the talent and of all people and the different ways that talent can be shown? Is it inclusive in where we post those job descriptions, those hiring events? If we're looking for folks with certain education, certainly we want to look in schools and it makes sense, or if we're looking at certain universities, certain areas. But are we missing out on opportunities to find folks with education in different areas? It's likely. Have we considered that? Are we taking the time to consider that not everyone goes to school in person? So we're missing that job posting. Maybe they achieve their degree online, so they're missing out on that additional access. And maybe there's very strong reasons they're doing it that way, right? Think again, back to lifestyle, financial. Maybe they have to attend school from home because they're raising children. And so they miss out that interaction of job postings in the hallways or in community centers of universities. And that's just an example of being mindful of how we're searching for the right applicant, for the folks with the talent, and how we can maybe in our best efforts to really throw out those fishing hooks to like get the best talent, we could be missing some folks and creating some inequity in that process. So some of these questions are really just for you to consider. What does promotion look like? How inclusive are these practices that we have for applications? How inclusive are interviews? Who sits on the panels? Who gets to decide? And that may be very rigid depending on your organization. Maybe it's specific to our HR folks. It's specific to, depending on the position, there's some very strict requirements, and there's a reason certain people have to be on the board of the interview panel. Maybe it's a board decision depending on the structure of every agency. So thinking about how all of those things can impact an applicant coming through and creating an inclusive environment for all people to have a place in your workforce. Thinking about promotion practices. How do we share those with folks? How do people let you know they're interested? If culturally, that's not something I would do, to go seek more money, or to say out loud, I think it's time you pay me more, or to say, I think I've been doing really great work and I'd like to see some investment on the company's part in that. I'd like to see an incentive, or I'd like to see, is there a promotion coming up that maybe I could apply for? I think it's important that we consider culturally, we have people who are very different in how they tackle that. And we could be missing out on opportunities to promote, to pour into leadership development into folks because they're not showing it or demonstrating their readiness or saying they're ready directly to us. And again, just consider how even in our own processing of things and how we go into the workplace, we could be missing out on some really top talent and also the inclusion of some different perspective. So some things to consider. Why should I care about DEI and cultural humility? I put this in here because I know that we have been definitely overwhelmed with these acronyms and phrases, and some people call it trendy. And while that initiative may have felt trendy at some point, it's very real to so many of us that we go into the workplace and have to be cognizant of how we are viewed, and that may impact how I move through the workplace. And not to say that that's a bad thing. We should all consider how we move through the workplace or through any space with others, except that there can be times where I may quiet myself, or someone may say, you know what, I can't be my boisterous, fun self, even in the lunchroom, even in a fun setting, a retreat with coworkers. Maybe it's a team building day. I feel like I can't be fully myself because I hear certain words said about too aggressive, too loud. Oh, people like her real boisterous, or they're speaking another language, and I wonder if they're speaking about me. Wonder what they're saying about us. And so those things happen, right? They're not old, antiquated ideas. Those things still happen. And I think rather than say, hey, folks who maybe feel different, figure out how to make yourself fit in here. What if we could say, how do we make everyone feel included? How do we create a workforce that feels so included that they can be themselves? And gosh, what a difference that could make in the creativity, in the connection between coworkers, between the workforce. What a boost to morale within the workplace. And when you do those things, what a difference that makes to the people we get to serve, whether that's in a hospital setting, whether it's in community setting, office setting, even if you work within a company like an IT or in finance, what a difference that can make when people can feel they can be open and share ideas with one another and get to something better. And so this is just a chance to think about, what does culturally affirming leadership look like? What does that mean to you? Why should I know about DEI practice in hiring and leadership? Well, I think it could be a hindrance if we don't consider. I think we could unknowingly cause harm to people who come to those interviews, who ask questions, who are looking to see people who maybe look like them or who are comfortable with people with like them, whether that's personality, appearance, language, the ability to be celebrated for who you are. That makes a difference to people, to everyone, regardless of your background. And I think we do ourselves, if we are at the top of an agency, if we're the director, the administrator, if we're the person overseeing all of this, we do ourselves a service to even just have a conversation. Maybe you don't start a whole initiative. Maybe it's not going to be stamped on your website or on all of your materials that we are anti-racist. We have a DEI policy in place, and maybe you don't have all of that. But maybe it's worth just having the conversation. Let's take stock of where we're at within our organization. Let's take stock of employee morale. How does our workforce see this workplace? Is this just, I come in, I check in, I do my job, I do what I can, and then I leave and fill my cup elsewhere because that's just paying the bills. That's fair. But I think if we're trying to create a space where people can stick around, we want that retention, because with retention, we get some seasoned, talented folks helping that new generation of workforce. What a great thing for everyone. We can learn from one another. New generation brings with it a lot of new ideas, a lot of new ways of seeing how to do the work, how to be in community with people, new ideas, right? Still challenges even people who have been there longer, who have been a little bit more seasoned. And so I think it's important we at least have the conversation within our agencies. I think it's important for the individuals that we consider our communication, our practices. What are our beliefs within our organization? What beliefs do people come to the table with? What are the customs? What are the rituals that we have that just feel like everyday things we do that could inadvertently be excluding someone when they come to work? That you welcomed them in, they had the skill set, they had the talent, they had the coachability, they're ready to go. And then there's these other little things that we just sometimes, if we don't talk about it, we miss. And they can have impact on that employee, and we can lose really great employees because we didn't do just a little bit of work. And it can feel like it, I say a little bit, it's simple, but it's not easy, right? Um, it takes a lot. We need to consider each of our employees, even in large organizations. You have managers, supervisors, you have leaders, team leads, floor leaders. Maybe you have multiple floors, and so you have someone, all the different ways you structure your leadership. There's a way to have a conversation on a smaller scale to get you, if you're the director, administrator, if you're the person overseeing an entire organization, an entire office, to get some information about how do my employees feel? How does their cultural background and who they are and how they enter the workspace mesh with some of these rituals, some of these office cultures that we have at play? And do they feel like they're welcome? Do they feel included? Do they feel like they were the token? We have to consider that people may be walking around feeling those things and not outwardly saying it. Again, the protection, right? How I enter the workspace. If I'm the only person who looks like me, if I'm the only person who speaks another language or who has newly learned an English language, if that's the predominant language in your office, then maybe I'm not sure that I can say this out loud. And who do I turn to? What does that do to me as an employee within your workforce? I think it's important we consider those things. I think it's important all the way from the top to seeking that employee. All of those things matter. And again, even if you don't have a strict uh, initiative, if you don't have we have an anti-racist policy, or we are inclusive and we stamp it on all of our paperwork, and this is how we demonstrate it. It's on the doorway when people come in, when they enter our spaces. This is what they know about us. Maybe it's not, and that is okay. I think that's okay. But are we having the conversation? Because if it's not felt, that's what's going to matter to employees. And I think that's important for those of us hiring, those of us overseeing an entire workforce. It's important that we note that. I think I say it's important we note it, and I think it's a daily practice. Is it necessary to always consider diversity when hiring? I know in some situations it feels like, look, here's what we're looking for. If it's diverse, it's diverse. If it's not, it's not. And to those, hey, that's your organization. If that's the way you practice things, great. If it's, here's the policy, we're following policy, and that's what we're doing, okay, great. But diversity could also mean that we hire the candidate that best meets the needs of our entire unit from a diverse pool of applicants. So maybe you're used to seeing, I'm stuck on IT right now. So maybe you're used to seeing, when you think of IT person, do you think of men? Do you think of a particular look? Do you think they present themselves a particular way? Do you think they speak about data coding? I said IT, and I'm at a loss because I'm not an IT person. Um, and maybe you could tell, right? So I say that jokingly because do we have an idea of what we're looking for in that sector? And so could that mean that we are missing out on some really great applicants if we are too narrow in that diversity idea? And diversity doesn't just mean race, right? Are we open to where we look for candidates? Maybe it's particular universities, but are we missing out that other colleges, universities, even community colleges, depending on the need of education level, that we could be missing out on some really good candidates who share new ideas, even in an interview? Something to consider. When we think about the diversity of our staff, it's not just, again, race, it's not just gender. Are we also thinking about thought process, how people view the world, view the work, how they view office culture? And we could be missing out on a chance to have an exploration of new ideas, new perspectives. Are we bringing in people who bring in a diversity of their background, of how to handle conflict? conflict management. That's not everyone knows how to manage when there's conflict. Do we know how to have courageous conversations? Courageous conversations can have a big meaning. It can be, oh, we got to talk with somebody. There was a microaggression. We got to have a talk about racism, bias, subtle acts of exclusion. We got to have a discussion. It could also be, do I know how to handle a longtime employee that is struggling to get on board with a new practice shift, right? Maybe your entire organization is moving in a new direction and you have some seasoned employees that are struggling to get on board. And in some places, it's like, look, you get on board and that's that. If not, here are the steps we take, and maybe you're no longer an employee. But in other areas, we try to keep those employees, right? We want to work with people. And so are we able to have those conversations? Do we know what it would take to get through that conversation with that person? Are we comfortable? Maybe culturally we struggle to have a conversation that feels like conflict, but it's just a necessary conversation of disagreements. And so it's important that we consider that. Also, are we bringing on people with different personality styles, different leadership styles? If we've only known one type of leader, is that all we're looking for? Do we say no to people looking to be promoted into this next position because they're not similar to that same person? Could we be missing out on something good for all of us, not just this new leader? Thinking about the right applicants, people coming through the door. What does that mean, the right applicant? Do you have an idea when before you sit down with that for that interview with that new person, that applicant coming through? Do you have an idea of what the right person is? If you have a panel of folks, are you all considering the same thing? Do you have different ideas? Have you considered that before you've entered the space so that you're all on the same page of the type of people you're trying to recruit? I think it's important. And this kind of leads to that conversation of cultural humility. Do we know how each other feels about the right person? As an example, I think back to working with a particular operations manager who was saying, I'm having a struggle with this new employee. I'm not their supervisor, but I'm really struggling. And so she said, I'm telling the supervisor they need to correct some things. The way this person talks, they're so loud and abrasive, and like, is this their first job? And they just said a lot of things that led me to think, okay, you're struggling with communication with this person. We're struggling to engage with personality differences, possibly. We didn't want to go the route of, oh, let's look at all the ways you two are different from each other, right? But let's just tackle this from personality. And so that was in a conversation I had with the operations manager, not necessarily with the employee first, on how are you viewing this person? What is the thing that you're trying to get accomplished with this person? Could you be putting some unknown bias on this person because they are so young, because of the role they're coming into? Could you possibly be setting an expectation on them that you have of other seasoned employees, and it's automatically a negative on this person? And so we had to have some conversation, which was great conversation. And the hope was that not just for that conversation, the takeaway could be, okay, I'll work on how I view this person, but maybe I need to consider how I view all people when they come through the door. If they have questions, again, the things that seem simple. Oh, what do you mean you don't know how to fill out an I-9, a W-4, all the things that we hand people and just assume. Also, their reading ability. If we don't ask, is reading all of this material, do we need to go over it? Can we read it together without calling out maybe a learning disability or a different learning ability, I should say? Maybe we haven't asked, maybe they haven't disclosed, but how can we help save face for the other person, but also be mindful? Are there things I'm taking into consideration for others? If we work up on the 8th floor and we are getting our steps in daily and we meet somebody on the ground floor, Are we saying, let's take the stairs and head up? Or have we considered maybe the stairs is not, maybe there are some things that I don't see visually that I need to consider this person may need to use the elevator? Or are we accessible in the way that they need? Are we saying, well, I don't want to have to deal with all those things? We gotta be cautious, right? Are we able to welcome folks, not just, gosh, we made accommodations for you, but hey, we welcome you and we're going to figure it out along the way because we value you as an individual, for the talent that you bring, for the background that you have, for the skills, and as a part of this workplace and what you're going to bring in diversity of perspective, of culture, what have you, into the workplace. It's important that we consider those things when we're thinking about bringing on a new person into our workforce. Reflecting on your organization. Think about your standards, code of ethics. Is there clarity? Understanding the importance of DEI, or at least culturally affirming initiatives or thought process, cultural humility and leadership within your organization. If it doesn't feel important, okay. Is it important to other people? Is it important to you, but maybe you just haven't been able to have the conversation? Maybe you sit in a place uh, of a position of some privilege, of some authority, some leadership, and maybe you've had these thoughts. Oh, I wish we could have this conversation. Does it feel like it's cropping up in different places in your workforce, and it's maybe time to have a conversation? It's a challenge, because thinking about bias, could bias be hiding within everything we're talking about? Talk about it. These are just a few types of unconscious bias. There's so many different types of unconscious bias. The great thing about bias being learned is that we can learn new ways to overcome bias, and we can unlearn some thinking patterns. But think about the affinity bias. Who do you sit with at lunch? If you have a diverse group of employees and people that you work alongside, who are the people in your affinity groups? Who are people who are part of your book clubs? Maybe your walking group. Maybe you get together every morning for meditation and mindfulness. Who do you involve in that? Is it certain folks who say, well, all the people who say they're interested? Are there people who feel like they can't say I'm interested? Think about how we demonstrate inclusion to everyone. Perception bias, again, the stereotypes. Um, People may look a certain way and sound a certain way. And do you have this idea of like, oh, I know who I'm dealing with. I know what this means. I know how to handle this person. Or, oh, I'm a little bit fearful because I know how people who look like this, or I have a stereotype about a person who sounds like this. And I don't know how to handle that. Things we should consider, especially in the workplace. That halo effect, we project positive qualities onto people without actually knowing them. Again, part of that perception, oh, they look like a sweet older person, a sweet young person, or a kind young gentleman. And we start to project these things without even knowing somebody. And again, it kind of ties into those perceptions, right? Like those things that we assume about others without knowing them. Always, this is separate from always wanting to assume positive intent in interactions with folks. This is saying, I'm assuming positive over here, but I may be having some different perception bias happening, some other stereotypical judgment happening over here. Confirmation bias. Again, sometimes these all bleed into one another. I have this perception about this stereotype, and I am looking for them to prove I was right. So that bias is valid then. We got to be cautious around that. And I think it's important, especially in the workplace, especially if we're dealing with serving other people who come from very different backgrounds. I think it's very important we tackle this and we do some individual work on these things. I don't think we can fully embrace holistic care of all the people that come through our doors or that are in our hospital settings or in our clinic settings without considering, is there bias of some kind that's holding me back from offering as much support and care and good care, right? Good medical care, therapeutic intervention, behavioral support, skills training, whatever it is that you do. Is there something getting in the way of me fully committing to offering good care to them? And so that's why I think it's important to consider bias in our outlook, within our leadership, within our organization, and then individually. So thinking about folks who are leaders, I consider people who take the time out of their day to join a webinar on their own time, and maybe you're being paid by work for this, but maybe not, right? To me, on some level, that always says there's some leadership quality. You're taking some initiative. Whether there's a title behind your name or not, to me, that shows some initiative. That tells me that this is somebody who wants to learn, which really that's cultural humility, the willingness to want to learn about others. And that's where I think people are on the right track to get a broader perspective and have more culturally informed perspectives. And so I feel like the fact that people have shown up today, even with just a little bit of interest, or even to say, I don't believe in anything she's talking about, still think you're someone who's invested in change. You're still invested in seeing things different at your organization, seeing things different within your workforce. And you may have your own reasons, and that's perfectly fine. So thinking about if you're a leader of any kind, again, without a title even, are you aware of your own bias? Have you thought about cultural humility? And I see that very differently from cultural competence, because competence says, I've got it. And I don't think I've got it even in my own family of origin. I still don't think I've got it within the healing circles I enter space to practice connection within my own community. I don't always think I've got it because we're not a monolith. Not every Mexican person is the same as the next. Language, region, how you grew up, male, female, non-binary, transgender, how you are, how you present, all the intersections of you, not the same. So I can't assume that. Same is true for Native and Indigenous folks. We are not a monolith. So I can't assume I got it. From one tribe, I get another nation. That's not true. I always have to tackle this from the place of always learning. And I think when we enter spaces always wanting to be kind and curious, we learn so much about people. And that says a lot as a leader to your workforce, to fellow leaders. If you take that stance of, I can always be learning, I never fully can say I'm 100% competent about every culture, all cultures, and every region across the globe. It's pretty difficult to say. I'd really love to hear from the person who is. So, because I feel like I could learn a lot. I think we all could. But do we see why this matters? Do we see why always being in that learning space matters? Why it matters, again, to our own role, to the people beside us, maybe work within a supervision group, managers, leaders, fellow agency directors. Maybe it's, again, within your own book club even. Maybe they see you as somebody who's always taking chances or bringing new ideas. What another great way to bring that into a space of broadening community perspective on cultural humility. So I think it's important we consider that. We think about our own worldview, we think about our biases. What could be a barrier to staying open to that diverse pool of applicants? Being more specific about the skills that we're looking for, more aware of those attributes and personalities or appearances of others, that those things can sometimes hold us back from offering or extending an opportunity to someone. If how you see people represent themselves in the workplace as what's business casual, what's business attire. Are we clear on what business attire is? What that means to me may look very different from you. Also, depending on where you grew up, how you grew up, who your role models were, and your current situation, do you have access to meet that requirement if that's a requirement of the job? Sometimes I think about I think about fast food chains because I have younger children, they're young adults. So if they see this, I apologize, young adults. Um, they, I remember them entering the workforce and coming to me and saying, "Oh, I have to have this uniform, but I also need these certain type of shoes, these certain type of pants." And I'd say, "Oh, they didn't provide that to you." They'd say, "Oh no, they just give you a shirt and a hat," or "They're giving me the shirt, the hat, and the pants, but they're taking a portion of this out of my paycheck." And I think, okay, yeah, of course I'm gonna figure out how to support my kid. That's my kid. It's for me, they call mom for everything. This is the parent that is like, yes. And we're gonna also now what does this mean for the next time you're in need? Maybe we need to save some money. But if you don't have that partnership, that model, that support, what does the person do? And then they enter your workforce unknowingly being held to a standard that they can't meet or may need some additional support to meet. And I'm not saying it's our job to buy the clothes for all of our new employees. I'm just saying, are we clear on what our expectations are? And do we also consider that this may be a barrier to some people, that having business attire that covers the whole body, for some people, that's going to be a challenge. Body size and the clothing to fit bodies of all sizes, um, from the lowest of the shortest to the tallest, right? Like I just think about just shopping. I don't like to shop. It's a nightmare. But when I think about it in the workforce, are we setting expectations? And rightfully so, you're entitled to set those expectations. But at least are we considering that for some people who are great candidates, this may be a barrier still. They may say, maybe you hear, I want to accept the position. It's going to take me a couple months, and maybe I'm going to need 2 to 3 months to get started. And we say, oh, let's pushing it. Maybe we can hold off and have a later start date. But maybe we haven't tackled, they haven't been able to share. We haven't offered other resources just openly. Maybe the reason is they've got to get a wardrobe together. They've got to work this other job to save some money. They're going to different resources, trying to get some business attire just so they can show up and be their best self first day of the job with you. Small things that can be huge to an employee. Again, I'm not saying we have to tackle it all for everyone. I'm just saying, are we considering how these things may have impact? How someone may say, gosh, I'm really excited about this opportunity, but I'm moving. I have to move. It's going to cause some relocation expense for me. Uh, I can't afford that. And maybe we don't offer relocation bonuses, or maybe you do, but you only offer it to certain positions. How does that impact other positions in your organization? You got to think about those things. I have some leadership styles. They're just some leadership styles up there. Thinking about business types. I'm not sure. Maybe you've tackled, what is it? What is my leadership style? What does that look like? Um, I think it's important to consider how we lead, because maybe we had certain models, maybe we had certain role models who stood out to us, or leaders we thought were good. Does it translate into the workplace that you are leading? Does it translate and work for the folks you're leading? And are there challenges? Do we stop to consider, is it me or is it them? Or do we just assume it's them? Definitely not a me thing, it's them. Can we objectively reflect on how our style of leadership has served us positively in the workplace? Like maybe being a really steadfast, strong leader, making hard decisions, even if it means hiring, firing on the spot, not swaying from what you say, and this is what we do, that has served you well. Have we also considered, where could I maybe learn a little bit more? Where could I shift a little? Because what's the impact on my employees? Am I getting their buy-in, or am I just getting their compliance? Right. So something just to consider. So when you think about culturally affirming leadership, cultural humility, thinking about a culturally affirming lens, again, thinking about how we embrace, acknowledge, accept all folks with all the intersections of who they are and how they show up to the workplace. How does our leadership style play a factor in that? Could we be missing some really important moments to highlight in an employee's performance because maybe they're just not, we don't get along like I get along with these other folks. We banter after work, we enjoy, we cheer each other up, we share positive affirmations, we share similar book club readings. And if I start to have more affinity that way, and I say, well, you're a good employee, could I be missing out an opportunity to highlight because we just not friendly that way? Think about what that does to your workforce, right? Again, you're the leader. Could we be blinding ourselves? Again, that bias barrier to some of those strengths of their personality. Could culture be impacted? Could that be a barrier? I don't know. I'm afraid to ask. Again, bias can sometimes come from a place of, oh, I tried to ask someone in the past and they shut me down. So now I have a fear of being called out. Never doing that again. So rather than engage differently or learn some new ways to engage, could we be adding a really strict frame of our own leadership and not recognize our employees' work styles? Bias, privilege, work ethic, worldview, leadership expectations, organizational culture. All of those things factor into our leadership style. They also factor into how we move throughout our organization, how we connect to the workforce. When we don't make time to do some of that internal work, again, on bias, privilege, how I impact on others, even though maybe we have some strict guidelines as leaders. But how we engage with our workforce, that has influence. That can influence and that can have impact. And so I think it's important that we consider that sometimes if we don't tackle those biases that we hold or the privilege and see how that privilege impacts others, that we can be at risk of causing harm to people. We can reduce that pool of qualified, talented applicants. That reduces the number of folks to interview or hire. It can reduce, okay, we've got these positions open and we don't have the people to hire. I know we have a workforce shortage across the nation for many reasons, lots of reasons. And this is just saying, let's not let these kinds of biases get in the way of opening opportunities to folks. Culturally, our work ethic can also look different. Are we aware of that? Could we be missing opportunities that we see somebody who looks like they're just taking it easy and someone who visibly looks like they are putting in work and they are tired, they are not leaving for the day? And are we highlighting good work ethic on the hours? Or are we actually looking at the work? Are they both doing great work? Maybe we need to talk about to this overworked person who's maybe tired on self-care, on taking care of self and avoiding burnout, right? But are we looking at work ethic as that person's really, really grinding it out and they are here overtime, extra hours, but what does the work look like, right? Are we staying focused on those things and not inadvertently creating some bias about what that looks like? I think it's important for leaders to possess cultural humility because, again, we need to be effective when we work with different teams, diverse teams, if we work in diverse locations, the populations we serve, that cultural humility can foster trust. It can enhance communication, and it also can improve the innovation of ideas. When we practice self-reflection, if we seek knowledge, if we do some active and authentic acceptance, some active listening, if we embrace mistakes happen, and we, within our cultural humility learning, right, that learning space, if we embrace that mistakes are going to happen, if we can promote inclusivity, and again, figure out what that means for you, right? Like figure out what that means for you, for your organization, for your workforce. But if we can promote that, if we can create environments that encourage understanding, collaboration, and success, then we get a better workforce. We get a better community of folks serving our communities who are really ultimately most deserving of having their needs met by people who are invested in them holistically. So I just put up a couple of, well, a few. These are like personality styles, personality, they're assessments, quizzes, tests, but really they're not the be all end all. I just put a few of these up because I think when we want to know more about our employees, sometimes it's like, well, how do I know my style? How do I know what kind of leader I am? How do I know what type of employee I am? How do I know my personality style? And some people are big on Myers-Briggs, this person, the big five, um, the Clifton Strengths, I've used those. Again, though, they're tools, right? So I mean, what a great starting point, though, with the recognition that these tools also have their own skew, problematic viewpoints. I mean, who are they based on? Who's the pool of people that they use to determine these things, right? So I want to acknowledge that. I want to acknowledge that there is some, just like an implicit bias test. I think it's the Harvard implicit bias test. It can just start the conversation, right? So that's what I would see these as. If I want to know what my leadership style is, if I want to know about the personality styles of the employees I supervise, I lead, I work alongside. Maybe it's investing in taking some time to do these. Maybe it's picking a few and then seeing like, where do people land? What does that mean in the workplace? How do we interact with one another? Again, same is true for hiring applicants. Maybe it's saying, hey, we really like to bring applicants in who do this 10-minute assessment test. Again, you're not graded on this. It's just giving us an idea, a little bit more insight about you for us to engage in a deeper conversation when you get to the interview. Maybe it's for the new hire. Maybe their onboarding is doing some of this, and it gives us some insight, how they think about things, how they process, how they feel about themselves as an influencer within the workplace. What is their work style, their work ethic like? Now, again, people are under the pressure of filling out these tests. Maybe they feel like, oh gosh, 10 minutes. I've just got to answer these questions quick. What's motivating me? I want to get this job. What else is maybe motivating me? Well, this feels more like the right answer, but this feels more like my true answer. We know those things are going to come up, right? So this is why I threw out some ideas of these assessments, but I also want to stress, we don't want to base a hiring decision on these. We don't want to base a promotion decision just on these. This is for engaging in more conversation, right? So thinking about how we can engage in more conversation with an applicant on strengths, on how they view themselves coming into an already established team, potentially an already established workforce. Maybe they're the last person that you're hiring onto a team for a project of some kind. What could that look like? Think about the people that you already have if you've already done something similar to this. One area I've learned in a couple of these different assessments, when I supervised a group of folks, I used these team strengths, and I really liked how sometimes they gave you ideas of, hey, if you're really strong in this area, here's an idea of how it can impact people who are different from you. And for me, that said, oh, all of these positive things can also have an impact that doesn't feel as positive for someone else, with different strengths, different personality types, different leadership expectations. Even though I may be the person they're looking to as a leader, I may not be what they envisioned, right? So it also can be helpful to see that and say, maybe we should have more conversation about that. And again, that what that looks like is up to you. But these can be great ways to start, great starting points for self. What does it say about me? Do I agree with these? Do I see it differently? Are there things I can learn? Or if you're trying to develop a well-rounded team of folks within your workplace, maybe it's looking for certain personality types, but again, you don't want to get so focused in on them, right? Engage in the conversation. How would this person fit into our office culture, our team culture? Is this outwardly seem like, whoa, they are very different within our team? But are we invested? Because gosh, we are so ready to have some new perspective, some new ideas, some new creativity, some fresher perspectives, some outside point of view, or somebody who's that risk taker that maybe the rest of us have kind of settled into. Things go, we maintain our employment, don't push the envelope too much, but maybe you're bringing someone in who's a risk taker and they're like, yeah, this is who I am. And yeah, there's some finesse in work. Like, you got to be cautious, right? But what a benefit that could be to a team that's ready for some shift, some change, some new ideas. So I threw some of these out just again, always thinking about how these can be part of a conversation. They're not the be all end all. Maybe you have your own list of questions. Think about how sometimes even how we question folks maybe implies what we want the answer to be. So just a chance to reflect on how inclusive are questions, how inclusive are the people who show up to ask the questions. That brings us to my conclusion. I just want to thank everyone for showing up, for sticking it out. I'm sure showing up is like, hey, I don't know what to expect. I did share these are some books, not all of them, some books and podcasts that I love to just tackle. I love to just check in, read, go back. Sometimes these are places, and this is just a small list of what I do. Like check in, read some different perspectives, different ideas, think globally, talking about bias, how to be more inclusive, that servant leadership roadmap. Again, because I believe in community care, servant leadership really speaks to me because it's in everything I do. But I wanted to share a few books that sometimes people ask about. These are starters, right? These are just starting points. And even if you read something and say, I don't agree with that, that's okay. I think it's important that we also read and listen to and engage in material that is very different, because then it can challenge us, right? It can challenge how we view things. It can challenge, even maybe solidify, you know what that person had to say, I definitely am glad this is how I think. Okay, maybe it solidifies it. Again, I always think it's great to tackle different areas of engaging with this kind of material, always wanting to be learning as a leader, again, with a title or without. And so I just want to say I appreciate everyone for sticking it out for this time.
Thank you so much, Bianca. Amazing, very informative. And I like what you said at the end, especially, about leadership and you don't have to have that, title in your work to be a leader. That is huge, very impactful. So thank you. And everyone, while you're listening, if you do have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A. We've got a couple that we're going to start with here. One of them, so sorry, let me move them over here to my screen. One is asking any suggestions on how to ask about cultural humility in interviews. The closest I can get to this is, quote, tell me about a time that you made a mistake in how you talked to a participant and what you learned, end quote. But it's often too broad to get the cultural humility information that this person is seeking. So do you have
Mm.
any suggestions, yeah, on questions in interviews asking about cultural humility?
I think it's always interesting within organizations, what can we talk about within the workplace? And sometimes the fear of what can we say, what can you talk about, is what stops us from just asking a more specific question. And so maybe the conversation is to go back and say, hey, let's check with HR and our legal folks. What can we say? Here's a question I want to ask specifically about, was there ever a time, again, I don't know what specific question they want to ask, but if they want to ask about an impact with racism or homophobia, whatever it is that you're trying to get at, I think checking with your legal folks, your HR, and say, what are the parameters? What are the things that we need to be cautious of? And then if they say, well, don't insult people and don't be racist and prejudiced and discriminatory. And if they say, hey, write out your questions. I've seen this done with a few organizations. You write out your questions that you want. What is your goal? What are you trying to get from the applicant? What are you looking for? And so then having those questions shared with your HR, your legal folks, the people who maybe we're concerned about getting in trouble with, to say, okay, here's what we're looking for. This is what the kind of thing we're trying to draw out from an applicant. Here are the questions we've come up with, and ask, are these okay? Will these meet a standard that if somebody says, I'm offended, you asked me if I'm racist? Well, we didn't say you were racist. We asked, are you? Not that you would ever do that in an application, but I'm trying to think of a question that maybe you'd want to be more specific about. And really, sometimes we hold ourselves back out of the fear rather than say, what are my parameters? Maybe we start there. What are my parameters? And then also, what am I trying to get from this question? Am I trying to figure out how they feel about a particular population of people? Am I trying to, like, what is the goal with the question? But again, figuring out your parameters, what's my goal with the question, come up with some, and then check before we even get to the interview.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's a great point. Starting with HR, maybe they have resources or lists of things. I know I worked in an agency where my HR did, we had a list of resources and questions. And they would always say it's important to then, if you include that question, ask it of everybody that you're
Right.
that's applying for that position. And somebody did put in the chat, which I thought was great too, said, let me get back to it. They're saying that this is what their agency asks. It says, tell us about a time you had a values conflict with a client. How did you handle it? And looking back, how would you have handled it differently? So that's another.
That's their question, or that's what their
That's,
agency is.
yeah, they're just adding to the answer for the question that we originally were
Okay.
talking about. So that's
Yeah, and
interesting.
I think it's again, what are we looking for, right? What are we
Mhm.
I worked with an agency where they would send out ahead of time to the applicant their mission, their values, and their statement on social justice. And the expectation was you read it because we may ask you questions when you show up for that interview. And I think sometimes both interviewer and the applicant are afraid, right? So sometimes if we don't really know what we're looking for and we ask the question like, oh, did you read the material? Can you join us in supporting those mission and values? And they say yes, and you ask, well, what would that look like? If you're not sure what your answer you're looking for, they're kind of just throwing things out. We're all unsure if we met the goal, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's being clear. What are we looking for by asking these questions? Can we be more specific in the questions we're asking? If it's about values, are there specific values you're aiming to understand or see how they connect with
Right.
the work that you do? I think sometimes it's helpful to just really focus on what is it that we're trying to get out of asking this question.
Mhm. You're right. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely knowing what you want to get out of it is
Right.
a lot. Um, the next question is, can you describe the key characteristics of situational leadership?
Key characteristics of situational leadership. Oh, because it's
Yeah,
in the
I think it was
leadership
on.
styles, I think
Mhm.
what they're referring to. Okay, so thinking about,
I think I think it was the 12 leadership styles, right? Situational leadership, I believe I remember saying, or it saying at the bottom that it was the best style. So I guess it was just a question of, well, what does that encompass then if it's the best?
yeah, and again, again, these are types of leadership styles. I think situational, again, what it says in its title, right? Situational. If we can be adaptive, like if we can be adaptable to number one, knowing about ourselves, learning about our employees, if we can be adaptable that situations may arise and it may require a different type of leadership supervision style that every employee may present differently to us for their needs, for their support, for their supervision, that the situations may be different. So maybe there is a time where, because of the situation, maybe out of safety, out of some real serious things happening, I need to be direct, firm, and this is how I'm directing things and leading, and this is the direction we're moving in, and that's that. And there may be a very valid reason for that. But then maybe in another situation, it requires a little bit more empathy, a little bit more compassion, a little bit more, let's take some time and think this out. Let me ask for more clarity. And so I think situational means we are adaptable. We're adaptable to our workplace, that times are changing, society is changing, the workforce is changing, that even though we have these organizational policies and values and a mission, things are changing. Can we adapt along with the workforce? I think about the workforce changing because I see that within a lot of behavioral health agencies. We have a younger workforce coming in, but if you have folks with some different ideas that maybe can be described as old school, um, it can cause like some conflict. And so can those leaders be adaptable that hey, how do we continue this mission and this vision that we have for our organization and be adaptable to this newness that these new employees, this new perspective brings with it, this new way of working brings with it. And so that's the way I would see situational leadership.
Mhm. That's great. Next question moves to conflict resolution in general. So I'm not sure, I guess, what the question is totally getting at, but I guess, do you have any ideas about conflict resolution regarding individuals feeling silenced, at an agency or their work when expressing feelings around atrocities that are going around in the world today?
Mm.
They had put in the Israel conflict as a situation that is going on today, affecting a lot of people.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, ideas or what to do regarding conflict resolution, regarding feeling silenced at your work when you're expressing feelings.
Okay, so I'm assuming the conflict is not being able to express themselves about their
Mhm.
feelings, is what it sounds like. That's what I'm taking
Yes.
away.
Okay.
Is that make
That's what
sense?
I'm thinking. Yeah.
Okay.
And if the person
Um,
asking the question wants to put in a little bit more, that would be great. But that's what I'm, yes,
yeah.
getting at from
I
this
mean,
question.
I think that's a challenge across any organization. I think there's so much going on in our world, even in our own backyards, right? There's just so much going on. And how do we just not talk about it? How do we not share that maybe we're struggling with it? There have been events that happen. I mean, I think about the impact that it had on me as a supervisor at the time when George Floyd was murdered in 2020. And in the middle of the pandemic and everything going on, and being part of a community that felt like we weren't received well. And it was just hard to go to work and want to serve people, knowing what happened, and just having people in my life wanting to share that and like carrying that for one another, leaning into one another. And it happens in the workplace that sometimes those are our people. Those are the people we lean into and we share connection with. And I think if it feels that you can't, I think figuring out, is there a policy that we have within our organization of what is allowed to be discussed and what isn't? Is there a stance that I'm violating? And if not, does our organization have any resources or a group of some kind or some support for those of us who feel this deeply and want a space to connect around? I think feeling silence is one of the worst things to feel in your workplace. If you feel silence, you can't feel genuinely yourself. You can't connect to your work, your coworkers the same. Maybe you don't connect to your supervisor similarly. Maybe there's fear. And so I would want to know if there are policies first that, like, I just want to make sure I'm not violating a policy. And then secondly, where can I find support? Because I'm coming into this work, but I'm also feeling strongly about this thing that's happening, these many things that are happening. And I need a space, even in the middle of the workday, which I know is a challenge for some organizations. I've heard it in different places. Well, how much do we need to do to take care of people? Can't they do their own therapy? Which for me just feels like, gosh, if we work in community care, this is peopling. We are people to people. This is heart to heart, and we are human. We are going to have human experiences. And how do we care for one another to say, hey, I want to take some time, or this is a space that you can share those feelings so that you know where you can be held. And then now we can move to what needs to be done in the workplace, right? But I think it's important to figure out first, are there things that we have a policy around? It's some places do, and we gotta acknowledge if that's where we work, they have that policy, and then finding where you can find your community to have that space, to have that support, because that's especially something like genocide. I think about it when we do land acknowledgements, when we do, we're talking about being culturally affirming and accepting. We have to acknowledge that there's also harm happening to people, not just in the past, but currently. And that weighs on all of us. So,
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Um, and I like, always, of course, because we work in
yeah,
agencies and businesses. So looking at the policy, seeing what's out there, what we can do, and possibly, you know, talking with supervisors and seeing, can we have some time for this meeting, carve it out for
mhm,
DEI, or talk about what's going on with us. Um, I know that I've done
right.
that before as a supervisor, and of
Mhm.
course having you know, rules, not rules, but just things written out, a concept of how we're going to engage in this meeting, because it can be um, very thought provoking. So I think that's
Yeah, I think that's why it's important to figure out what is our policy and is it possible to create a space for people who want to come together. And I think sometimes that's the initiation of the larger conversation of, is our workforce, our whole organization able to have these conversations? How do we engage in them? And sometimes that may mean organizations need to reach out to outside consultants, right? And
Mhm.
great. If they're bringing in more support, great. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So everybody reach out to Bianca, get your get your leadership to reach out to Bianca.
Sure. I love these conversations. Because again, we serve people, and if we want to be as open to serve, again, offering whether it's in a hospital setting, community care, in a clinic, one-on-one as therapists, whatever work we're doing, if we want to give our best to people and be as open to offering all the possible options to them, then can we be as open as possible? And sometimes that means engaging in hard conversations. And I always look at it as if engaging in this and having a little bit of discomfort or a lot of discomfort for a little while in the grand scheme of things leads to a better outcome for the people we serve and the people we work alongside, it's all worth it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I think those are great words. So thank you.
So,
We just have a lot of people in the chat saying thank you so much. And thank you so much for your kindness and generosity and sharing your wisdom and experience. This was great,
thank
definitely.
you.
We do still have the Q&A open, just so that people know. But I am going to put up our QR code here really quickly for the evaluation. Please do, if you can, take time to fill it out. And I believe we put the link in there in the chat as well. We understand if people do need to leave, but we do have some time. If anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in there. This, yeah, this work is just so important. So thank you so much, Bianca. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, I mean, I think just continuing on, just while we're waiting to see if anyone else asks questions or letting folks leave as they need to.
Mhm.
It's really important, especially within our mental health, community care, community mental health, behavioral health, medical systems. We have so many people wanting to reach out and wanting support that is meaningful to them, that involves taking a look at who they are holistically, all the intersections of who they are. And we also know they're coming from communities that maybe aren't able to hold space for who they are. And so if as practitioners, we can learn to do better, be more open, then I think it can be life-changing for people. I've seen it be life-changing for folks who are leaving places, who are having to start over, having lost all community. And sometimes it starts with a paid professional, a practitioner, but how powerful if even in that person they see they're deserving of being seen completely. And for new hires, for new people, what a difference it can make in our workforce, again, to serve those populations if they feel poured into for who they are, how they show up to the workplace, invest in the time to provide, maybe it's more education on here's what business casual means at this place. Here's what business attire, here's what we mean when we say casual. That seems so simple, but there's an array of thoughts and ideas. And for somebody to be left out, well, they'll figure it out. Gosh, that's unfortunate if we leave people figuring it out in ways that only hurts them and doesn't provide more opportunity for them in the future. So I think it's important that we invest in the time as leaders, and especially as folks bringing on new talent to the workplace, that we consider being open and not so rigid in who we're looking for or the type of person or the personality.
Mhm.
We could be missing out, and the people we serve are definitely going to be missing out too.
Yeah, yeah. We do have a question in the Q&A that asks, thank you. And are there standardized methods to assess for cultural humility?
Standardized method? No, because I mean, this idea of cultural humility, again, that would be like cultural competence, right? Like looking for the markers. I think one of the things I look for in cultural humility within an organization or within an agency or with teams when I work with them is, do all the people feel like they can engage in learning? Do they stay open to learning? And are they open to when mistakes happen, learning from those mistakes, learning to say, okay, I'm receiving feedback. Here's what I can do with that. And here's how I'm going to continue moving forward. I think being open, even in conflict, I think we have to be open that that cultural humility piece is just, are we open to learning? Are we open to acknowledging we don't know everything, which is so hard to say. So hard to say when, if you, especially if you hold a position with a title of leadership, that's so hard to say that I don't know everything. But when we talk about cultural humility, cultures, people, their backgrounds, we talk about a whole globe of people. And shared language is one thing, but that doesn't mean you share the same type of culture. You may not have been raised the same. So we always have to remain open. I think that's what I look for. If any marker, it's openness to learning, openness to knowing I'm going to continue learning. Just because I have familiarity with a particular group or groups of people or with the language doesn't mean I know it all. And I think if I'm looking for a marker, it's that openness and willingness to engage in learning.
Mhm. I think that's great. And when you were talking about, just because we may sound the same doesn't mean that we're the same. And it's a whole globe, of people and culture. I just felt myself like very excited, and it's exciting to know. I mean, just be curious. That's basically, wanting to learn, wanting to grow, being curious about people.
Absolutely.
So I think that's great. Um, all right. So I think we will end a few minutes early, give people time
Okay,
back.
great.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you so much for taking the time today to be here. We appreciate it. We appreciate all of you. Thank you, Bianca, so
Thank
much
you.
for all
Appreciate
that
you
you
all.
have taught us.
Absolutely. I appreciate the time, both you and Peyton, and all your support and your help.
Thank you.
Take care.